On the Let's Talk television program, we share solutions to real-life problems with real people, showing how faith guides everyone through the storms of life. We talk about tough issues that affect all generations. Our conversations help you learn, grow, and lead. Help us continue with this great work by partnering with us today. Call 905-625-1278, extension 233, or visit letstalkca.org. We look forward to your partnership with us to change lives. Let's Talk, revealing the heart of Christ through engaging media conversations.
Sometimes you walk through life alone, wondering if anyone understands what you are going through, hoping someone will listen and offer a word to make your day. The Church of God of Prophecy offers unconditional love and support, regardless of what you are going through. Visit cogop.ca for a location near you. The Church of God of Prophecy, developing authentic disciples of Christ.
Welcome to another segment of Let's Talk. I'm your host, Woodrow Thompson. The month of February is designated Black History Month. And today we'd like to talk about being Black in Canada. What does it mean to be Black in Canada? Our guest today is a social justice advocate, researcher, writer, consultant, and international speaker on Black history, anti-racism, and women's issues. She's the past president of the Ontario Black History Society from 1993 to 2015. Being the president of the Ontario Black History Society, she became the driving force of securing the commemoration of February as Black History Month at all levels of government, and she did this through education, research, and outreach programs. She saw the creation of the National Day for the Honorable Lincoln Alexander, the first Black member of Parliament in the House of Commons. Rosemary was born and raised in Toronto, and she has degrees in teaching and social work. However, her roots in Canada goes all the way back to pre-Confederation. Her mother's family can be traced to 1840, while her father's ancestors arrived in New Brunswick in 1793. She's the recipient of several awards: the Order of Canada, the William Payton Race Relations, and the Harry Jerome Award. It is a pleasure for us to welcome Rosemary Sadler with us today. Welcome to Let's Talk.
Well, thank you very much, Bishop Thompson, and thank you for that very generous introduction. But I have to just say one thing. You'll have to nominate me for the Order of Canada because I have the Order of Ontario. So
it's the Order of Ontario.
So
we'll work on that.
Forward to the nomination.
Very good. Let's start with Black history. As someone who was a driving force behind the commemoration of February being designated Black History Month, what was the vision for that? What was the reason behind that?
Well, there's so many ways for me to answer that question, but the reality is that, as a Black woman, as a Black person, as somebody who was part of this society from the, birth, obviously, I was often the only Black person in any space I took up, the only Black person in my neighborhood, in my classroom, in my school, except when I went to church on Sunday, which happened to be a Black church. And that sort of gave me a bit of balance, so to speak. So for me personally, I was acutely aware of the lack of representation of people who look like me, acutely aware. And when I was put in a position by somebody nominating me to be on the board of the Ontario Black History Society, and then when I later became the president, I was committed to doing what I could to make this a very important commemoration.
Right. Now, following up on that, do you find that Black folks behave differently in public spaces than whites do?
That they feel different?
Do they behave differently? For example, when I walk into, my boys were born here in Canada. And going to school in the early years, they'll tell me that, you'd have 30 students in a room, like you're saying, a classroom, and they'll be the only Black person. So when they enter that space, just like you were saying, they're always looking to see if there's another Black face around. Do you think that's still the case with us as Blacks when we enter public space?
Well, I absolutely. I think that it's human nature. When you enter any space, you look around for people who are potential friends or allies or supporters. You look around for people that could be a threat or a problem. You look around for people who are like you. And I think that you do it whether you're even conscious of it or not, because you were always looking for connections and family, wherever we can find it. Yeah.
So the commemoration of Black history, I know that it is to educate, it is to celebrate, it is to look at the accomplishment of Blacks. But I'm also thinking that sometimes we don't go deeper in trying to not only look at all of that, but look at how the past has impacted us and how we can actually move forward. So sometimes I think the celebrations are certainly there, the education is there, but sometimes I think we stop short. How do you think we can dig deeper and move forward in making becoming more impactful as a race?
That is such a good question and such a complicated question. First of all, let me just say that when I was in charge of the Ontario Black History Society, it was the only provincial heritage organization in Ontario dedicated to Black history, and frankly, the only one in the country. We were significantly under-resourced, underfunded. So people may have assumed that we had staff, and we didn't. And so what was done on a shoestring and a prayer, as opposed to having millions of staff and millions of dollars. So I just speak about, the restrictions that we had as an organization trying to move that particular dial forward. But I think that we're further hampered because of the lack of Black history education in general. That's beyond what we have attempted and beyond what needs to happen. There are people in this society who don't feel there is a Black history. There are people who feel that there are only recent arrivals of Black people to this country, not understanding that they are coming upon and adding to an ongoing presence of people of African origin since the very beginning, since before the very beginning, since Canada only became Canada in 1867. And I think that the other problem is that many people sometimes are having more of a nostalgia and connection to places that they came from. And perhaps are even contemplating returning, which is their right. But in the process of doing that, they're not also digging in or asking those questions or contributing to what's happening right here where they are now.
Now, I must add that you served as a volunteer to that society. You didn't have the funds to be paid or anything like that. But just out of curiosity, how long has Black people been part of this country? Because you made a very valuable point that those who come to this country, maybe presently or some years ago, seem to think that this country doesn't have a rich heritage. How far back can we go to show that Black people has been part of this country?
Well, the transatlantic slave trade was significant, and certainly that brought the largest number of Africans out of Africa into the West, into South America, into the Caribbean, and into the United States, more so than Canada. People generally didn't come directly on the transatlantic slave trade into Canada, but rather via the Caribbean or the United States.
Right.
So we know about that experience, perhaps, but Africans have been in this country probably since the 1400s as coureurs de bois. Africans helped to found the cities that are the border's very loose, but they helped found the cities of Chicago and Detroit. Africans continued to be a presence in the 1500s. I'm not talking about overwhelming 5 million people, but they were still. And the first named African arrived on these shores, the first one that we have a name for, not the first African. And his name was Matthew da Costa. And he was here by about 1604. And at the point in time when he arrived, he was able to speak Mi'kmaq, which means that he had exposure, he had connection. He had likely been here before because he was not only an interpreter and a contract negotiator, but he was also somebody that helped to create and maps and sort of check out areas for possible trade.
Very good. What are some of the contributions that Blacks have made to this country? Because sometimes, if you're not careful, it seems as if Blacks have not made any contribution to this country in which we live.
It's easy to be dismissive of the contribution that people have made to this country because sometimes people are swayed by the very strong African-American influence and presence. So much of our reading material and learning material and entertainment, when it does feature people of African origin, it's always African Americans.
Correct.
So, for example, in about 1993, I also started working on one of my first books. I've written 7. And in doing the research for that book, I came across I interviewed Carrie Best in Nova Scotia. And Carrie Best told me about Viola Desmond and what Viola Desmond had done and what her experience was. Now, not that there were people that existed and were important before Viola Desmond, of course there were. But what was phenomenal to me is that here was this amazing story about an African Canadian woman that, and I was telling it everywhere I was going, and I did at least 2,000 presentations for the OBHS. But it was sort of like it wasn't heard because the louder voice, the clearer understanding was that there was a Rosa Parks, even though they were comparable women, comparable things. But Viola Desmond did what she did 10 years earlier. Well, I think that, very often we have people who've done exactly the same thing on both sides of the border, but we only know about the African American example. And that's how our history continues to be overlooked or lost or dismissed. And certainly white historians, I was recalling that when I went to write my first book, before there was no social media, so you actually had to go into the library. And I went into the Oise Library, and I was going through the stacks, and I came across, a reference like the book, the Bible of history for Canadian history. And I went to the book, which was written by a white historian by the name of J.M.S. Careless. And the book was this thick. And I went to the back, went to the index, and it's like, okay, so where are Black people, African people? What is the word that will help me find where we're located on the page? And I think the word that I found was Negro. I went to where Negro was listed, and there was one sentence. And that sentence basically said, Black people came into Canada on the Underground Railroad and went back to the United States when the Civil War was over.
Wow.
I'm here. There's lots of people I know that were here. Like I said, I went to a Black church. I mean, there are all thousands of people who are in this country that didn't go back. Thousands. people who didn't even come in on the Underground Railroad, had come in previous to that. But that helped to inform the narrative that everybody thinks they know. And so when people are coming in from another country, they don't question that narrative. And in fact, encouraged to learn that narrative, which never remembers to really mention the diversity that exists in this country. So how do you question it? And how do you appreciate that it's here? So I think that's part of the reason why we have something like a Black History Month, not because it should be the only time to ever consider, the only time to ever learn about, the only time to ever share and enjoy and speak about Black people in a positive way. It was supposed to be the culmination of what people were doing all year, so that they could really continue to share and build on the information that they had learned.
Very good. Well, we're going to take a short break, and then we'll be right back to continue the conversation. Please stay with us. We'll be right back.
On the Let's Talk television program, we share solutions to real-life problems with real people, showing how faith guides everyone through the storms of life. We talk about tough issues that affect all generations. Our conversations help you learn, grow, and lead. Help us continue with this great work by partnering with us today. Call 905-625-1278, extension 233, or visit letstalkca.org. We look forward to your partnership with us to change lives. Let's Talk, revealing the heart of Christ through engaging media conversations.
Welcome back to Let's Talk. If you've just joined us, our guest today is Rosemary Sadler. And just before the break, we spoke about, you shared with us about Viola Desmond. In 2018, she became the first Canadian woman to appear alone on a Canadian $10 bill. How did that come about?
It came about in a number of different ways. I would like to think that I contributed by sharing her story and speaking up about her constantly, but I'm not the only one. Obviously, Carrie Best is the person who advised me about the story of Viola Desmond. It was actually her sister, Wanda Robson, who, as a senior citizen, was taking some university courses out of interest. And something came up in one of her classes, and she said, "Hey, wait a minute, you're talking about my sister. That's my sister." And they were like, everybody was stunned because, Wanda didn't, this was life, she didn't think about it in it being in terms of the historic value that her sister's experience really was. And just for those who don't know, let me just maybe recap that.
Sure.
What Viola Desmond did. Viola Desmond was married to Jack Desmond. They had a combined beauty shop and barber shop on Gottingen Street in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And Viola was very much connected to Halifax. She was born and raised there. She wanted to do more in terms of the beauty business. She had to go to the United States in order to get her training because she couldn't even get get teacher training in Canada. It wasn't permitted. So she went to the United States and got beauty school training and even started to create her own line of beauty products for Black women. She also would later open up a school teaching other Black women some of the skills that she had learned about caring for Black hair, which is very complicated. Our hair is the driest hair in the world and very fragile in some instances. And also just to develop cosmetics that suited our unique coloring. Her business was expanding, and she, being the affluent and influential business person that she was, decided to go around the province of Nova Scotia in order to sell her products and expand her school. She went into an area called New Glasgow, which was maybe, 4-hour drive from Halifax.
Right.
but she'd never been there before. And in the course of the drive, her car developed some trouble. She had to take it into a garage to be serviced. So she left her glasses in the car, and she still had some time to kill. So she went into a theater in order to kill time.
Of course.
She put her money down to buy a ticket. She
Mhm.
didn't have her glasses. She went in, sat down. Like she didn't question. She bought a ticket, went in and sat down on the main floor. And she was tapped on the shoulder and told basically she could not sit there because
Right.
she was supposed to sit in the balcony. Well,
Right.
she offered to pay what she learned to be the difference in the price of a main floor and a balcony seat. They wouldn't
Right.
take her money. So she went and sat on the main floor anyway, because that was the only way she was going to see the movie she
Right.
wanted to see. Next thing she knew, she was dragged out of the theater by a police officer, thrown in jail overnight, and not allowed to have any kind of legal consultation. In the morning, she was charged with defrauding the government of Nova Scotia, the tax difference between the cost of a main floor and a balcony seat, which was effectively 1 cent. And that was only because segregation,
Right.
racial segregation, unlike in the United States, wasn't
Right.
on the books as a law, but it was
Right.
in practice as a reality.
Mhm.
And it was highly practiced in New Glasgow in a way that was different than Halifax. So
Wow.
it was very difficult for her.
Right.
It ultimately cost her her marriage, her health, her business,
Mhm.
and she died in relative obscurity. So when
Mhm.
Wanda, her sister, realized that this is the person they were talking about from the theater in New Glasgow, she worked with others in locally to do what she could to have Viola's name better known. And ultimately, Mayanne Francis, who was then the lieutenant governor of the province of Nova Scotia, did what she could to have her posthumously pardoned for the charge that had been brought against her. So it's incredibly fitting that she
But
appears on our currency.
but it was so many years after that that she was pardoned, though.
Oh yes, she long dead and unfortunately forgotten, perhaps by many people who'd known her very well. But it's symbolic, and some
Yes.
people feel that the charge should remain as an important punctuation point to always note. And other people feel no, it's important that she be pardoned because essentially better late than never to do the right thing.
Right.
She should
I
never have
agree.
been charged in the first place.
Yeah. You know, I heard where one of our prominent politicians say that Canada does not have systemic racism like we see in the US. And so they'll always point across the border and say, what happens there doesn't happen here. Um, this may sound like a strange question. Is there racism in Canada? And when we say systemic racism, what do we mean by that? Because some folks seem to have a hard time wrapping their head around that.
You know, I was on a show about a year ago on Power and Politics, and it was live. I had been
Right.
told during the day that I was supposed to watch whatever I should become highly familiar with whatever the prime minister was saying that day, because I would
Right.
like to be questioned about what the prime minister was saying. But
Right.
when we went live, the interviewer showed a clip of the premier of Quebec and the premier of Ontario, both
Yes.
denying the existence
Yeah.
of systemic racism. And then
Right.
the question was put to me on live national TV, is there systemic racism?
Right.
I'm going to give you the answer that I gave them. Yes, there is. And systemic racism means that our systems, our ways of doing things, our laws, our institutions, everything that is in that defines our society has come from a racist, a racist perspective, a racist founding. And that doesn't mean that you as an individual might be racist. What it means is that the systems that we are all working with and through were founded on racist terms. Were founded to make things better, easier, or to keep certain privileges for one group of people who were usually white and usually men, as opposed to anyone else. When we talk about systemic racism, it should actually be easier because we're talking about the high level overarching systems. We're not talking about whether or not you are nice, or you're not nice, whether you have offended me personally or not. We're talking about the reality of the systems that we are part of that have influenced what we're all experiencing on a daily basis. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We're talking about our laws. We're talking about our school system. We're talking about everything, our health system.
Well, I sometimes watch I think it's a podcast, Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. It comes out of the US. And one of the things that Emmanuel Ocha, who is the host, he loved to have, just some white folks on his show and talk about racism. And one of the things that I hear people saying, especially white folks, is that they were never taught. See, they didn't know anything about racism, and so they were never taught about racism, and so they may never realize that they were racist. And so now that this has come to the forefront, some of them have a hard time grappling with it or really identifying with the fact that there may be racist views or racist tendencies within them. Is that a valid excuse to say nobody taught me? I didn't know anything about racism?
No. If I drive over the speed limit, I can't say to the police officer pulling me over, I didn't know that the speed limit was such a way. I take a piece of fruit in a supermarket and don't pay for it. I can't tell the person who might grab me by the arm and ask me what I'm doing that, I didn't have to pay for this. Being ignorant is not an excuse. And I think that being and also being uncomfortable is not an excuse. Because Black people have been uncomfortable for a really long time. We've been uncomfortable not being able to earn the same amount of money for the same type of work if we can actually get our foot in the door. We've been uncomfortable not having our stories reflected in our school system. We've been uncomfortable going to rent apartments and finding that they won't be rented to people that look like us. We've been dealing with these things for a long time too. I think that the reality is that it isn't about, again, there is systemic racism, which exists no matter how pure and perfect and spotless your particular behavior might be. And then there is racism, which is an act of aggression, whether it's mild or egregious, like the public execution of George Floyd. He says everybody has the same opportunity to get hired in a particular job. Is it true? Does everybody have the same access to that job? Does everybody have this? Will everybody get the same shot if an interviewer sees their resume? Does everybody have the same ability to draw upon their network to assist them in getting into or alerting them to things that they might need to know in a particular area? We don't all have the same opportunity. We may well have be able to secure the education and training in 2022, but there are still barriers that prevent us from getting into some of the things that we'd like to be able to do.
Well, you know, you talk to some folks and they say there's equality right across the board. I'm not
Equality
sure.
is not equity.
I like that. Equality, not equity. When you saw what happened to George Floyd um, on television, how did that impact you?
Um, yeah. On one hand, it didn't impact me because this isn't new. But
Right,
but what I did note, of course, I mean, as it was horrendous, and God
right,
bless George Floyd and his family. But with that experience and with the bravery of the teenage girl who captured this for the world to
right.
view,
Hmm.
um, I think that what it did is that it made it possible, that combined with the health pandemic, made it
Right,
possible for people to really give consideration to what is important to them, to
right,
really begin to have some of those courageous conversations out loud in
right,
in in mixed groups, perhaps in a way
hmm,
that didn't happen previously.
right,
Things that people talk about, often Black people will talk about these amongst themselves. And we
hmm,
do speak differently amongst ourselves because we don't have to filter our language. We don't have to
right,
worry about offending someone or having someone take it the wrong way, even though we may all have had those same offensive or racist experiences.
right,
What I think it did is that it changed the way some of those conversations took place. And I
right,
have to admit that that was maybe where some of the surprise was, where some of those conversations that seemed to be more private for just with Black people were now more public with many more people involved.
right,
We need to see is not just the opportunity, this great opportunity to voice and share our concerns, but we need to see more action to address those
I
concerns,
agree.
the
Right,
changes that will help to make things better for us all.
right. Now, most Canadians will point to the US, as we mentioned before, and say that things are not that bad in Canada. Um, One of the things that I'm wrestling with is how do we bring about change to something like racism in Canada? What are some of the things we need to do?
I think that we, first of all, there really is no significant difference between Canada and the United States. We have a significant difference in terms of population totals,
Right.
and we have another significant difference in terms of our approach to guns, in terms of
Hmm.
carry
Right.
guns really, and
Hmm.
so forth. But really, we're two sides of the same coin. We are societies that are um, the products of seeds that were planted by Europeans, by systems that were grounded in white supremacy. And these systems have continued to grow on both sides of the border.
Right.
Numbers are different, but the experiences are the same. And
Right.
thankfully, they are a bit reduced because of the populations, but our population is growing. And
Right.
so if we are to learn something, we do have to look at what's happening in the United States for some of the trends so that we can be prepared, or we can try to be proactive about addressing some of them.
Right. So I know we have to close this segment soon, but just one quick question before we close. Is there hope for Canada where racism is concerned?
There's always hope. There is always hope. And I think that that is what keeps us all going.
Very good. Well, Rosemary, it's been a pleasure having you. Could you just share with our viewing audience how they can get a copy of your books, or if someone needs to engage you in conversations regarding racism, Black history, because I know that that's something you speak well to. How would they be able to get a hold of you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram And my email is my name at gmail.com, rosemary.sadler@gmail.com.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Rosemary, for being with us and for the information you've shared. You've certainly enriched us with this information, and so we can build on what you've shared with us. God bless you, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
God bless you. I'd like to thank you for joining us today. And as mentioned, it is Black History Month. Would like for us to not just celebrate, but to make sure, as Rosemary shared with us, that you and I will continue to be informed about what's happening where racism is concerned and where Black history is concerned, and how we as a people can continue to move forward. And we can also educate the next generation as to what's happening and some of the history that is available to them. Thank you for joining us. That's all the time we have for today, and we look forward to seeing you again. Have a great day. Let's keep talking.
On the Let's Talk television program, we share solutions to real-life problems with real people, showing how faith guides everyone through the storms of life. We talk about tough issues that affect all generations. Our conversations help you learn, grow, and lead. Help us continue with this great work by partnering with us today. Call 905-625-1278, extension 233, or visit letstalkca.org. We look forward to your partnership with us to change lives. Let's Talk, revealing the heart of Christ through engaging media conversations.
Sometimes you walk through life alone, wondering if anyone understands what you are going through, hoping someone will listen and offer a word to make your day. The Church of God of Prophecy offers unconditional love and support, regardless of what you are going through. Visit cogop.ca for a location near you. The Church of God of Prophecy, developing authentic disciples of Christ.